Chapter 547. Jiang, although you have a fish farm, I can tell at a glance that you haven't fished at night. Seeing Jiang Hai sitting there and preparing to fish, Mayor Wallace and the others wouldn't let go of this opportunity to lecture the younger generation. Perhaps they were old and liked to take advantage of their seniority. Of course, Jiang Hai wasn't very disgusted by these old men talking there. They weren't arrogant, nor did they take advantage of their seniority. They were just a little long-winded. Jiang Hai still had to accept it. They were nothing more than looking for a reason to talk. Generally, people of their age, in addition to having common topics with old men of the same age, probably wouldn't have any common topics with young people. This was called a generation gap. Now that they saw a young person like something that they were very good at, they couldn't help but show off. Hearing their words, Jiang Hai just smiled and didn't say anything. Indeed, it was his first time fishing at night, but he didn't think there was any difference. After all, he was no longer the same person he was a year ago. He had fished at least dozens of times this year, and each time he would catch more than a dozen fish. It could be said that he was already a veteran. Fishing could be said to be a breeze for him. How could he not know anything? However, since they were talking, just let them talk. Jiang Hai didn't want to listen to them. But soon he knew that in fact what these old men said still made some sense. Fishing at night was indeed not the same as fishing during the day. Although there were two fishing methods, the hand rod and the sea rod. The sea rod caught big fish and the hand rod caught bait. However, at night it was quieter and the fish would be more daring to eat. Generally, big fish were all intelligent. When they saw bait during the day, they might not come to eat it, but the chances of catching big fish at night were much higher than during the day. In addition, the choice of rod, line, bait, hook, and so on were all very particular. The four old men were all using fake bait, while Jiang Hai was using clam worms, which were the best choice for sea fishing. However, after waiting for about half an hour, the four old men all got some fish, although they were not big, but Jiang Hai didn't get any. The old men hugged the fish and took photos before throwing them back into the sea. They were here to fish, not to catch fish. Therefore, other than the fish they wanted to eat, they would not casually kill other fish. This was also the difference between a real fisherman and an ordinary fishing enthusiast. In the eyes of some fishing enthusiasts, the fish they caught belonged to them. However, in the eyes of these experienced fishermen, these fish belonged to nature. If they wanted to eat it, it would be another matter, but if they didn't want to eat it, there was no need to bring it up. Today's fish is really weird. Jiang Hai said doubtfully as he pulled the fishing rod back and saw that the clam worm was still there. Gray Gary, who was the closest to Jiang Hai, couldn't help but laugh. We told you at the beginning, but you didn't listen. Now you know? Let me tell you, there are two things you did wrong. I guess you won't get anything tonight. First, the clam worm you used is indeed a good tool for sea fishing, but don't forget that it's night now, and there are very few kinds of fish with night vision. In other words, if you throw the clam worm into the water, it won't be able to see it, so how can it be hooked? Also, the float you used is an ordinary float. Can you see it sinking? Looking at Jiang Hai, Gray Gary introduced the fish to Jiang Hai. After hearing his words, Jiang Hai was instantly enlightened. He had been raising fish for half a year, so he had some understanding of fish. Most fish indeed didn't have night vision, and their vision was very poor. The reason why they could hunt for food was mainly the movement of the water current and the smell. However, this was the sea and the waves were moving all the time. Therefore, when the waves surged, the fish's senses would be much weaker. If it was daytime, they could still see the bait, but at night they really couldn't see the clam silkworm, which was so small. The smell of the clam worm was naturally far worse than the fake bait, so it was inevitable that Jiang Hai couldn't catch it. Unless he changed to real bait, but Jiang Hai never used fake bait or real bait like small fish or shrimps when he went fishing. He only used them after he caught a few, so it was impossible to change the bait now. Looking at the appearance of the old men around him, Jiang Hai was somewhat resentful. These old men didn't say that they wanted to use him as bait. Moreover, Jiang Hai didn't bring any beef with him this time. Would he really have to return empty-handed tonight? Although he was a little depressed, Jiang Hai didn't think of directly using spiritual energy, which was too wasteful. Looking at Jiang Hai continuing to fish with the clam silkworm, the four old men couldn't help but laugh. It seems like their first choice for cooking has been determined. Seeing this, they couldn't help but laugh. They could feel the deep malice of these four old men. Jiang Hai also sighed he was too useless today. If he knew this would happen, he would have brought some beef back. Just as Jiang Hai's heart was somewhat depressed, suddenly his pole sank, making him unable to help but laugh. Jiang Hai never had any skills when it came to fishing. The moment his fishing rod sank, he straightened it. He wanted to use his powerful strength to pull this guy up, but when he used his strength he got a fright. To be honest, Jiang Hai had caught a lot of big guys, sharks, tuna and everything else. However, he had never used so much strength and the fish didn't float to the surface. This was the first time. The fishing line straightened instantly, and Jiang Hai was also reeling in the line. Seeing this scene, the four old men who were talking and laughing at the side couldn't help but be shocked. Is it a big guy? Seeing Jiang Hai reeling in the line, Mayor Wallace knew how strong Jiang Hai was, so he couldn't help but ask in confusion. This fishing line is not moving at all. It doesn't look like he caught a big fish. It looks like he caught something. However, as soon as he said that, God Leslie shook his head and said uncertainly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roll his eyes. He was very sure that this guy was jealous of him, and Jiang Hai was even more certain in his heart that it should be a big guy. Based on this pulling force, this fish should be more than a ton. More than a ton of fish? If it wasn't a great white shark, then it might be a whale? Thinking of this, Jiang Hai worked even harder. He had never caught a whale before. It turned out that Jiang Hai's fishing line and rod were indeed well matched. Although it wasn't the most expensive, it was indeed quite sturdy. Even with Jiang Hai's great strength, there was no trace of it moving at all. After about 3 minutes, Jiang Hai lost his patience and began to pull harder again. The four old men also surrounded Jiang Hai. With Jiang Hai's roar, the fishing hook under the water was directly pulled out of the water by Jiang Hai. However, when everyone saw what he pulled out, their stomachs were about to explode from laughter. 3 black lines appeared on Jiang Hai's head because it was really as God Leslie said. Jiang Hai really didn't catch a fish. It was a mass of seaweed. Looking at the seaweed in front of them that even the roots were pulled out by Jiang Hai, the four old men laughed until tears came out of their eyes. Jiang Hai just stood there. His face was really embarrassed, but he couldn't say anything. "TSK, you can't catch a fish with seaweed? Let me use the seaweed to catch one for you. As the saying goes, even if you lose, don't lose." Jiang Hai looked at the seaweed on the ground with a disdainful smile on his face. He then picked up a piece and wrapped the fishing hook directly. Under the mocking gazes of these old men, Jiang Hai threw the fishing hook into the sea, but before throwing it in, he added a trace of spiritual energy to it. Originally, he didn't want to use this thing to bully these old men, but now it seems that if he didn't let them know what a socialistic successor was, they wouldn't know why flowers were so red. It's not that I want to say this, but if you use the seaweed to catch a fish, it'll be our loss, okay? Looking at Jiang Hai's expression, Gray Gary wiped the tears from his laughter and said to Jiang Hai, "You'll regret it." Jiang Hai glanced at the old man. He didn't have much confidence in the seaweed, but he was very confident in the spiritual energy. He believed that the spiritual energy wouldn't let him down. If that's the case. Seeing that Jiang Hai was still stubborn, Wilcox Arnold also clapped his hands and wanted to say something, but before he could finish, Jiang Hai had already exclaimed, "There's a fish." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the four old men once again ran to Jiang Hai's side and looked at Jiang Hai in surprise. At this time, Jiang Hai's fishing line was straight again. Seeing this, the four old men looked at each other. "It can't be seaweed again, right?" God Leslie, who had already predicted it once, said after hesitating for a while. "No, this time the fishing line is moving, it's indeed a fish." But hearing his words, Mayor Wallace also said, "But why is it moving so slowly?" Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Gray Gary also had some doubts. Listening to their words, Jiang Hai's heart was actually a little drumming because he felt that the strength this time was similar to the last time. It was also a ton of weight, but Jiang Hai didn't know the specifics. He could only slowly retract the fishing line. As the fishing line was pulled out of the sea, a huge dorsal fin appeared in front of Jiang Hai and these old men. Looking at this huge dorsal fin, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Another shark? But this dorsal fin looked a little different from a shark's. Just as Jiang Hai was puzzled, Mayor Wallace suddenly shouted with an excited face. He had been here for many years. At first he was a little confused, but soon he recognized it. "This is a mola, a mola." Mayor Wallace shouted as he pointed at the big fish that was getting closer and closer to the boat. Chapter 548. Sunfish, also known as flipper, mambo, and head fish, was a type of fish in the class Teleost. There were only 3 types in the world. There were very few suborders, but their distribution was very wide. Almost all the tropics, subtropics, and even temperate and cold zones of the world had this type of fish. In the sea, this type of fish was not well known. However, this type of fish still looked very scary. Its body length was only about 3 to 5 meters, but its weight could reach 3.5 tons. This type of fish had been discovered and famous a long time ago because this type of fish could not swim like a normal fish. It only knew how to swim with its fins that looked like small wings. Its tail fin was so small that it could not be seen, so it looked like this type of fish had been cut in half. In the beginning, on the internet in Wuxia, some people called this type of fish strong. However, it was later proven that this type of fish grew up like this. This type of fish was distributed all over the Atlantic Ocean. According to the name in Boston and the United Kingdom, this type of fish was also called the ocean sunfish. The Spanish called it the moonfish, the Germans called it the swimming head, and the islanders called it the mambo. The reason this type of fish was called the sunfish. It was because this type of fish would float up and turn sideways and sunbathe in the sea, so it was also called the sunfish. This type of fish could be considered the sloth of the ocean. It swam very slowly, basically floating. It was really like rowing a boat without oars, only relying on the waves. However, don't look at this type of fish. It looked strange, ran slowly, and looked like it was easy to catch. This type of fish was indeed easy to catch. However, this type of fish was not an endangered species. There were two main reasons. First, this type of fish was really good at reproducing. A female fish could produce 300 million eggs every time it laid eggs. Well, it was no longer a question of whether it could reproduce, but it could reproduce too much. With such a huge amount of eggs, even if the survival rate was 1 in 10 million, it could still survive 30 fish, not to mention it was not that bad. 1 in 10 million could survive 300 fish, which was about the same amount. This was already very scary. And the other reason why this kind of fish was not endangered was that their meat was really too disgusting. As a fish, the sunfish ran so slowly. How did it defend itself? It was mainly due to its tough skin. Its skin was impenetrable, impervious to fire and water. Sharks, sea lions, killer whales, no matter what kind of marine animals it was, could not break its skin. This was its strength. Therefore, generally speaking, the predators in the ocean would not take the initiative to find trouble with the sunfish even if they were hungry, because they couldn't bite them at all. Hearing Huang Yunfei on the other end of the phone say that he was getting married, Jiang Hai woke up in an instant. He immediately said it twice and then asked with some doubts. Ahem, what do you mean by that? I only have one girlfriend. October 4th, Sunday, August 22nd of the lunar calendar. Do you have time to come back? Listening to Jiang Hai's words, Huang Yunfei on the other side immediately changed the topic. It seemed that the bride-to-be was by his side. When Jiang Hai heard what he said, he did not expose him but laughed. This Huang Yunfei Jiang Hai still knew very well. Because his family studied medicine and was also in the hospital where he was. After graduating from college, he first became a nurse and then a doctor. When he was a nurse, he went directly into the operating room. When he first started working, his income was quite good. Later, he relied on his connections to get a doctor's qualification certificate from a nurse. Instead, he was a little more relaxed. Although he would still perform surgery, it was more to get his qualifications. Qualifications were very important in the country at all times. Of course, what was more important than qualifications was prospects. But this Jurassic World has been released for 13 weeks, and it can be said that almost everyone has seen it. It hasn't been released yet, mainly because the box office is so good, and some people want to watch it a second time. But these people are in the minority after all, so after Jiang Hai and Bernice walked into the theater, the whole theater was empty. Sitting in the middle of the 6th row, the two looked around with the 3D glasses that were given when they entered the theater. Don't tell me they booked the whole place. Looking at the empty hall, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Fortunately, it was impossible for the theater to only sell 2 tickets at a time. After Jiang Hai's voice fell, some people walked into the theater. Most of these people were a man and a woman. After walking in, they moved to the last row or some corners. Jiang Hai didn't have any opinion about this. After all, not everyone is willing to sit in the middle, but to be honest, for a movie with 3D special effects, sitting in the middle is the most comfortable. Soon about 10 or so people came in and no one else came in. As the lights dimmed, the movie also began. The first scene of the movie was a dinosaur egg hatching. Then it was a couple who were about to divorce. In order to make time for their divorce, they let their 2 children play with their aunt first, and then they entered the plot. Jiang Hai has never seen this movie before, so he watched it very seriously, and so did Bernice. Although she called Jiang Hai out, mainly because she didn't want to see Jiang Hai fighting with others in the bathroom. But since they are here to watch a movie, she still watched it very seriously. The two ate a bucket of popcorn together. Their hands and other things would touch from time to time, but the two didn't care. After all, this is considered normal contact. When the male lead appeared and began to train the velociraptor, a strange sound entered Jiang Hai's ears. It seemed to be the sound of saliva. This made him frown. He turned his head and looked at the place where the sound came from. However, when he looked over, he was almost scared to death. Because at this moment, at the place where the voice came from, he saw the man and woman who had just entered sitting there. The woman was lying on the man's lap, and the voice came from there. Jiang Hai was also an adult. He heard the sound of water last night, but when he saw this scene he was stunned. Everyone knows that Americans are bold, but they shouldn't be this bold. This is so blatant? This scene shocked Jiang Hai so much that he was no longer in the mood to watch the movie. He just kept looking over there. After watching for a while, a low moaning sound came from the back row. Looking over, he saw a figure moving up and down. Needless to say, Jiang Hai also knew that the people behind were no longer satisfied with just the foreplay. They started to use real swords and spears. Don't mind, this is my friend, I think you shouldn't mind, let's have a few more people. Looking at Barton's somewhat changed face, Jiang Hai walked forward with a smile and said to him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Barton also laughed dryly. Boss, I'm going to pick a breeding cow first, we'll meet here at 11:30. Compared to Jiang Hai, the main purpose of coming here was to look at the goods, but for Robbins Garcia the real purpose of coming here was to pick a breeding cow, so he was not going to go with Jiang Hai, but was going to pick a breeding cow alone. With Philemon Turner, the local tyrant, and the protection of Azalina, Conrad, and Belle, Jiang Hai should not have any problems, unless these guys don't want to stay in the United States anymore. Okay, you should also be careful. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also gave him a checkbook. This stack of checkbooks was signed by Jiang Hai, which meant that as long as Robbins Garcia filled in the numbers, he could go directly to the bank to exchange money. This was also Jiang Hai's trust in him. Of course, when he went to the bank to exchange money, the bank would call Jiang Hai to confirm. Although Jiang Hai trusted Robbins Garcia, he was not so generous that his money was Robbins Garcia's money. He was not a saint, his money would always be his money, no one could take money out of his pocket. Okay, I got it. After taking the checkbook, Robbins Garcia nodded and said, then walked to the cattle market in the distance. After he left, Barton also led Jiang Hai's group of 5 to the other side of the town. Soon they walked out of the town and walked to the edge of the town. After arriving here, whether it was Belle or Azalina, both of their expressions changed. This was because this place really wasn't a good place. At this time, Jiang Hai and the others were in the middle of the town in the Alabama mountains. Near here was a grassland, and their goal was to deal with several large warehouses in front of the Alabama mountains. Behind the warehouses was the Alabama mountains, and there were grasslands on both sides. Not far ahead was a road. It could be said that this was a good place for criminals to hide and escape. According to the poachers, the animals that they stole were not protected by the U.S. government. In other words, the animals that they caught were not protected by the U.S. government. Naturally, they were protected locally. For example, the Greenland seal. Catching this thing in Canada would naturally be caught by the Canadian police. However, when they crossed the border and arrived in the United States, the Constitution of the United States did not protect the Greenland seal. This was because, except for Alaska, there was no such creature in the United States. Without such creatures, there was no point in protecting them. At the same time, because they were not endangered species, they were not protected internationally, not even in the Washington Convention. Chapter 564. You're leaving in 2 days, why don't you pack up? Bernice, who appeared in the first sentence of the second chapter, looked at Jiang Hai who was teasing the Greenland seal. Well, it's now called Whitehair. She looked at Jiang Hai who was teasing Whitehair and couldn't help but shake her head helplessly. She had to admit that Jiang Hai, this guy in Bernice's eyes, didn't have the slightest bit of youthful vigor. Jiang Hai was really lazy, had no ambition, no fighting spirit, and didn't seem to have any hot-bloodedness. Ever since he came back from buying the cow, Jiang Hai had started the retirement mode of an old cadre. What he had to do every day was very simple. Get up in the morning. Well, he didn't get up in the morning anymore. He would get up at 9 o'clock, wash up, eat breakfast, and then go out for a ride on his four-wheeled motorcycle. In fact, the most important thing was to go to the seaside to contact the dolphins and Big Idiot. Then he would go to the stable to ride Little Xia for a ride. After feeding some carrots, he would ride the small car back, lie down on his white jade recliner and start playing games. Recently, Bernice found that Aphrodite and the others would no longer do anything that shouldn't happen with Jiang Hai in the bathroom. This made her feel very relieved, but she didn't know that the battlefield had already moved to Jiang Hai's bedroom. In this way, when the battle was over at night, Jiang Hai would hug the two girls and have a good night's sleep. The next day it was the same as the first day. This state really made Bernice speechless. Because there was really no trace of a young man on Jiang Hai. If it wasn't because she saw him every day, she would have thought that this guy was already in his 50s. Why was he so indifferent to everything? Young people have good things and bad things, but Jiang Hai didn't have any of them. This really made Bernice confused. The good side of young people was their ambition, fighting spirit, and fighting spirit. After all, they were still young. If they didn't work hard now, what would they do when they were old? This was also the foundation for young people to gain a foothold in this world. No matter what their goal is, a better life, a better partner, more money, a better future, etc. At this time, they would fight for their dreams, but Jiang Hai didn't have this intention at all. Ideal? According to Stephen Chow's words, a person without dreams was no different from a salted fish. There was not much difference between ideals and dreams. They were both goals that people worked hard for. In a novel, this was called the main plot. For example, if a person's engagement was broken off, he would swear to prove himself and prove that those who looked down on him were wrong. This was the main plot, the goal, the ideal, and the dream. Although Jiang Hai also wanted to burn for a while, suddenly one day he realized that being a salted fish was actually quite good. It was fine if he didn't have any dreams because he really didn't know what he wanted now. Power? He was not interested. Money? He was not short of money now. He had money, leisure, and women. Being a salted fish was not a big deal. Therefore, unless there was something urgent, Jiang Hai was really unwilling to change his lifestyle. But in Bernice's eyes, or maybe in the eyes of normal women, Jiang Hai was indeed a little too strange. Of course, people like Aphrodite and Daliana did not count because they worshipped and approved of Jiang Hai. If Jiang Hai farted and said it smelled good, they would say it smelled good. Feng Yunxian and Ai Xiaoxi were also different because they did not have a relationship with Jiang Hai in the beginning. Qi Li and Jiang Hai were also different because Qi Li was originally high and mighty, and Jiang Hai was her accessory. Suddenly, this accessory rebelled one day. Oh no, it was an uprising, and he even overrode her and saved her life. In addition, there was a messy and melodramatic storyline between the two, so no one knew what happened to them in the end. Because Xiaoya was inexperienced, she was protected since she was young. Her only dream was to live under the sun. Now that Jiang Hai had helped her realize her dream, she was actually the same kind of person as Jiang Hai, except that she was a woman and Jiang Hai was a man. Apart from the weird thoughts of the people around Jiang Hai, ordinary career women would feel that Jiang Hai was very childish and boring when they looked at Jiang Hai. If you have the time, why don't you think about earning more money and improving your social status? Find something for yourself to do, help your subordinates, study and learn more about the manor, the ranch and the fishing ground. There were probably many people with such career women around them. They were commonly known as strong women. They couldn't bear to see others like Jiang Hai, who was lazy and had nothing to do all day. In their opinion, there were actually a lot of things that Jiang Hai could do, but Jiang Hai didn't do it. Instead, he chose to stay there, which was very unbearable. What's there to pack? You told me to pack last time. If you lack anything, I'll buy it when we get there. Pulling the thick flesh on Whitehair's body, Jiang Hai picked up a herring that Edward Anderson caught and played with it. Herring was also called Pacific herring. Of course, this fish could also be found in the Atlantic Ocean, and there were quite a lot of them. Among the 4 major fishing grounds, the Peruvian fishing ground relied on this fish to make a fortune. Herring and cod were 2 of the most economic fish. However, now the population of cod was slowly declining with the closure of the Newfoundland fishing ground in Canada. Herring, on the other hand, was actually the most popular type of fish. This type of fish had a very disgusting way of eating it. After it was fished out, it would be immediately sealed in a can. When it was time to eat it, the taste. Oh my god. Compared to Wuxia's stinky tofu, it was like the difference between a small hill and the Himalayas. It was ranked second in the world's smelliest food. Jiang Hai naturally wouldn't eat it like that. What a joke, he wasn't crazy yet. After these herrings were caught, Edward Anderson and the others would use them as bait because this fish would eat almost any fish. They were between 18 centimeters and 40 centimeters in size. When they were cooked, they tasted very good when fried. Especially now, the herrings were seeded. They were fried with beer and the taste was quite good. Of course, these things could be eaten and caught on the spot. The fish with the largest number in the world was not a joke. So Jiang Hai fed the excess to Whitehair, and Whitehair had no resistance to this food. Buy, you only know how to buy. You are very rich. Well, you are very rich. Look at how wasteful you are. Sooner or later, you will starve to death and have to beg for food. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice snorted at Jiang Hai, then continued. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai just smiled but didn't refute her. Perhaps in the eyes of others she was very annoying, but in fact in Jiang Hai's heart he was quite eager for someone to nag him like this, because it would remind him of his family. If Jiang Hai had any dreams and wishes, the most important would be to raise his children but not have his parents. Although Bernice was much younger than him, her nagging made him feel like a family member. So Jiang Hai didn't have any dissatisfaction with Bernice. Instead he was very affectionate with her nagging. Perhaps Bernice also knew that what she said had no effect on Jiang Hai, so after talking for a while she sat back down next to Jiang Hai and played with white hair. Looking at Bernice's pretty face, Jiang Hai also smiled. This girl was really interesting. If possible he hoped that this girl could stay here forever. But the relationship between him and her, Jiang Hai wasn't too good to say because it was indeed not so easy to establish. Just as Jiang Hai was looking at Bernice playing with white hair, her phone suddenly rang. The screen of the phone lit up and a word was written on it. Seeing this, Bernice also stood up and took her phone to the side. Jiang Hai didn't move and just looked at her. This was because Jiang Hai really didn't know. Bernice and Xiaoya never talked about their family situation. Because they didn't go out together, Jiang Hai didn't even know their real names. It was just that Xiaoya called her Bernice for a long time, so they were very familiar with it. Now it seemed that Bernice had an elder sister, but why didn't she talk about her family's situation? Since she didn't say, Jiang Hai didn't ask. He just watched her walk away. He vaguely heard that she seemed to be speaking Mandarin, and there were words like the Mid-Autumn Festival. It seemed that her elder sister asked her if she was going back for the Mid-Autumn Festival. But Jiang Hai remembered that he also asked her if she would go back for the Mid-Autumn Festival. Sure enough, it didn't take long for her to come back. She asked if you were going back for the festival? Seeing her coming over, Jiang Hai couldn't help but ask curiously. And I said that I won't go back for the Mid-Autumn Festival. Let's talk about it during the new year. What kind of drug did you give this little guy? It actually recognized the name white hair. It's really unpleasant to hear. When she heard Jiang Hai's question, Bernice instantly changed the topic and pointed to white hair in front of her. It was obvious that she was also very dissatisfied with the name white hair. Oh, how nice. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai wouldn't tell her about the news of spiritual energy. But at this moment, Jiang Hai's phone also rang. He picked it up and saw that the caller turned out to be Qi Li. After thinking about it, maybe Qi Li also saw that the Mid-Autumn Festival was coming, so she called. Chapter 565. Ever since they fought side by side, the relationship between Jiang Hai and Qi Li was no longer the same as before. When they met, they didn't have a good impression of each other. For Jiang Hai there was only disgust. After all, the relationship between the two was not so harmonious. As a man from the 3 provinces in the northeast, he was obviously a male chauvinist. He was ignored by his wife at home for a whole year. It would be strange if he felt comfortable. Moreover, he was despised by the people around her every now and then. So after Jiang Hai had the ability, he was indeed like a villain and directly turned hostile. Of course, if Qi Li didn't seem to be so arrogant to him, he wouldn't have such a big opinion of her. But this kind of relationship, after Qi Li admitted defeat and talked to him in the manner, had become a lot weaker. Plus, last time they fought side by side, so the relationship between Jiang Hai and Qi Li improved a little. Jiang Hai didn't know what Qi Li was thinking now, but in Jiang Hai's heart, the hatred for Qi Li had been completely put down, but there was still no love. So the relationship between the two now was a bit like childhood friends, but it was also a little awkward. Looking at the phone call from Qi Li, Bernice's eyes flashed. Then she didn't say anything. She just turned her head and continued to feed white hair, and Jiang Hai stood up and walked to the side to pick up the phone. Hello Qi Li, what's the matter? After picking up the phone, Jiang Hai asked Qi Li on the other side of the phone. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li hesitated for a moment, then said to Jiang Hai, Hello Jiang Hai, it's nothing serious. The restaurant is running well, but just now my mom called me and asked if we will go back for the Mid-Autumn Festival. Hearing Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little speechless. This address, doesn't seem to be appropriate. I might not have time during the Mid-Autumn Festival, but I should be back in Bing City in November. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai decided to say it. Everything had to be done first, and AI Xiaoxi called him first. So now Jiang Hai really didn't want to go back to Bing City during the Mid-Autumn Festival, but it didn't matter. On November? Okay, can you tell me why you want to go back to Bing City in November? Hearing Jiang Hai say that he won't be going back during the Mid-Autumn Festival, Qi Li was somewhat disappointed, but when she heard Jiang Hai say that he will be going back in November, she was happy again. Huang Yunfei will get married in November, and I will go back then. Hearing Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai also said, Oh, if that's the case, I'll see you then. I'll free up some time too. Seeing that Jiang Hai is really going back in November, Qili also said quickly. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also smiled and responded. After chatting for a while, Jiang Hai hung up the phone. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai put away his mobile phone. If he is going to Ai Xiaoxi's house and Qi Li's house this time, then he needs to prepare some gifts. Originally, if he is just going to Ai Xiaoxi's house, he can just buy the gifts after returning to China. But now he is going to Qi Li's house, so he needs to take some gifts from the manor. This is not because he is looking down on Ai Xiaoxi's family, but because of the problem of vision. If he goes to Ai Xiaoxi's house, he can just take Wuliangye, Maotai, health supplements, cigarettes and so on. After all, Ai Xiaoxi's family is not very rich, and Jiang Hai used to be a child of an ordinary family. It is already good enough for him to take these gifts for the first time. Even if Jiang Hai gives them beef and fish, they don't know how much these things are worth. When the festival comes, he will treat them to a meal and say that his son-in-law brought it back. In China, there are not many ordinary people who would think that delicious beef is worth much. At most they will say, your beef is real and the taste is very authentic, and so on. Therefore, instead of taking things from the manor, it was far better to directly get some good cigarettes and good wine. When the relatives came over, the top-grade Maotai and Wuliangye would be placed on the table. It was much better than beef and other things. However, if he goes to Qi Li's house, he can't bring these things. Qi Li's house doesn't lack these things. It is more of a token of appreciation, so it is necessary to bring some beef and so on. What are you going to do? Seeing that Jiang Hai put away his mobile phone and was about to walk to the villa, Bernice, who was feeding White Hair, couldn't help but raise her head and ask Jiang Hai strangely. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also responded quickly. I'm going to pack my things. This time there is one more place to go. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice curled her lips, but she didn't say anything. She just continued to sit here and feed White Hair, but it can be seen that her eyes have been flashing, indicating that her heart is not as calm as she looks on the surface. But at this time Jiang Hai didn't notice this. In fact, he was not a person who would pay attention to these things. After returning to the manor, he casually put away some of his undergarments and a set of outerwear. After getting off the plane, he always needs to change into a set of clothes. Jiang Hai's clothes are still the same as before. As for sportswear and outdoor wear, he naturally disliked suits and the like. Wearing such things was pretentious and rigid. No matter what others say, he really doesn't like it. Now, he has the final say in what he wants to wear and what he wants to wear. So if he doesn't want to wear these things, no one can control him. Even if his clothes are untidy, it's up to the person. Those people in high-end places will recognize his watch and his glasses.